At 04:35 hours on May 10, 1940, General Lieutenant Heinz Guderian stood in the cupola of his command Panzer III, watching the lead elements of Blitzkrieg of the Panzer Corps cross the Belgian border. Behind him, stretching back 60 miles along narrow forest roads, were 140 vehicles carrying 370 men. Three Panzer divisions, 1st, 2nd, and 10th, along with the Grossdeutschland Regiment, and supporting units formed the most concentrated mechanized force in military history. The Corps was moving through the Ardennes forest terrain that French intelligence had assessed as impenetrable to armor. French military doctrine stated that the Ardennes could not support large-scale tank operations. The forest roads were too narrow, too winding, too restrictive. Tanks would move slowly in single file, vulnerable to air attack, unable to deploy for combat. Any German attempt to push armor through the Ardennes would create a traffic jam that artillery could destroy. Guderian had spent 3 years arguing the opposite. The Ardennes was not impenetrable, it was merely difficult. Difficulty could be overcome through planning, training, and accepting risk that conventional military wisdom considered unacceptable. The narrow roads meant movement would be slow, but movement did not need to be fast if the destination was unexpected. The French were defending at the wrong place. By the time they realized German armor was coming through the Ardennes, it would be too late to redeploy. Guderian's command vehicle was equipped with multiple radio sets, one for communication with division commanders, one for communication with Corps headquarters, one for direct communication with Luftwaffe liaison officers coordinating air support. This radio network meant Guderian could control his entire corps while moving with the lead elements, could respond to situations as they developed, could adjust plans in real time. This was revolutionary. Traditional command doctrine placed generals at static headquarters, receiving reports via messenger or telephone, issuing written orders that took hours to reach frontline units. By the time orders arrived, the tactical situation had often changed, making these orders obsolete. Guderian commanded from the front, saw the battlefield, directly issued orders by radio that reached subordinates in minutes. The radios crackled continuously. 1st Panzer Division reporting progress through Clairvaux. 2nd Panzer Division reporting Belgian demolitions had destroyed 3 bridges. Engineers were constructing bypasses. 10th Panzer Division requesting Luftwaffe strikes against Belgian defensive positions at Neufchâteau. Luftwaffe liaison confirming Stuka dive bombers en route, arrival in 12 minutes. Guderian monitored all transmissions, intervening only when necessary. His division commanders were trained to exercise initiative to solve problems without waiting for orders. The radio network allowed them to coordinate actions without centralized control. When 1st Panzer Division encountered Belgian defensive positions blocking the road, 2nd Panzer Division automatically moved onto parallel roads to bypass the position. The coordination happened in minutes without Guderian issuing specific orders. By 1200 hours, 99th Panzer Corps had penetrated 35 miles into Belgium. By 1800 hours, lead elements reached the Belgian-French border. By midnight, Panzer reconnaissance units crossed into France at Bouillon. Total advance in one day, 45 miles through terrain the French considered impassable to armor. French intelligence received reports of German tanks crossing the Meuse River at Sedan. The reports were dismissed as impossible. German armor could not have reached Sedan in one day. The reports must be inaccurate, probably describing reconnaissance elements or small raiding forces. The main German attack was obviously coming through Belgium along the traditional invasion route, not through the Ardennes. By the time French High Command recognized their error, 3 Panzer Corps totaling 7 Panzer divisions were across the Meuse, establishing bridgeheads pushing west toward the English Channel. The defensive line that France had spent 20 years fortifying was being bypassed. The entire French strategic concept was collapsing. This was Blitzkrieg, Not a single tactical innovation, but a comprehensive operational doctrine that combined mechanization, radio communication, air support, and decentralized command into a system that moved faster than opponents could react. The doctrine was not invented by committee or developed through institutional planning. It was conceived, refined, and implemented by one man who had spent 15 years arguing against conventional military wisdom. Heinz Wilhelm Guderian was born on June 17, 1888, in Kulm, Prussia, modern-day Chełmno, Poland. His father was Friedrich Guderian, an officer in the Prussian army. Military service was the family tradition. Heinz entered the Imperial German Army as an officer cadet in 1907, commissioned as a lieutenant in 1908 at age 20. His early military career was conventional. He served in the 10th Hanoverian Jaeger Battalion, transferred to the Telegraph Battalion of the 3rd Telegraph Battalion in 1912, and was promoted to first lieutenant in 1914 at the outbreak of World War I. He spent the war as a signals officer not in combat infantry but in communications units supporting frontline operations. This assignment was fortuitous. As a signals officer, Guderian was responsible for establishing and maintaining communications between headquarters and frontline units. He saw firsthand how communication failures caused operational failures. He observed that commanders often could not reach subordinates, that orders took hours to transmit, that battlefield information was outdated by the time it reached decision-makers. He also observed the few instances when communication worked well. During the German Spring Offensive of 1918, some units equipped with radio sets maintained contact while advancing. These units coordinated more effectively, responded faster to changing situations, achieved better results than units relying on telephone lines that were cut by artillery or messenger runners who were killed en route. Guderian concluded that communication technology was as important as weapons technology. An army with perfect communication using mediocre weapons would defeat an army with perfect weapons and mediocre communication. Speed of decision-making mattered more than firepower. After World War I, Guderian remained in the Reichswehr, the 100,000-man army that the Treaty of Versailles permitted Germany to maintain. He served in various staff positions, studying military history, attending professional military education, developing expertise in logistics and operations. In 1922, he was assigned to the Inspectorate of Transport Troops, a staff position responsible for motorized transport and mechanization. This assignment changed his career and ultimately changed warfare. Guderian began studying how motorization could improve military operations. The Reichswehr was already experimenting with motor vehicles, using trucks to move supplies and troops faster than horse-drawn wagons. But Guderian saw potential beyond logistics. If trucks could move faster than horses, then fighting vehicles could attack faster than infantry. If communication could be maintained by radio, then fast-moving units could be controlled and coordinated. If mobility was combined with firepower and communication, then entirely new operational possibilities emerged. The concept was not original to Guderian. British theorists J.F.C. Fuller and B.H. Little Hart had published similar ideas in the 1920s. French officer Charles de Gaulle published Vers l'armée de métier, toward a professional army, in 1934, advocating for mechanized forces. Soviet theorist Mikhail Tukhachevsky developed deep operations doctrine emphasizing mechanized breakthrough and exploitation. But Guderian was unique in having the combination of theoretical understanding, practical experience, and institutional position to implement these concepts. He was not just advocating for mechanization. He was developing detailed tactics, training methods, and organizational structures that would make mechanization work operationally. In 1929, Guderian was assigned to teach tactics at the Motor Transport Training School in Berlin. He used this position to develop his concepts of mechanized warfare. He studied foreign military literature, read British and French theorists, analyzed World War I battles to identify where mechanization might have changed outcomes. He concluded that the fundamental problem of World War I was the inability of attacks to maintain momentum. Attacks would break through initial defenses but then stall because infantry could not advance faster than defenders could bring up reserves. Artillery support could not keep pace with advancing infantry. Communication broke down as units moved beyond telephone wire range. Mechanization could solve all three problems. Tanks could advance faster than defenders could react. Self-propelled artillery could maintain pace with advancing armor. Radio communication could maintain coordination even during rapid advance. But mechanization required more than just building tanks. It required redesigning the entire operational system, tactics, organization, training, logistics, command structure. Everything had to be optimized for speed. In 1931, Guderian was promoted to Oberstleutnant Lieutenant Colonel and appointed Chief of Staff to the Inspectorate of Motorized Troops. This position gave him direct influence over German mechanization policy. He used the position to advocate for dedicated Panzer divisions, combined arms formations built around tanks, supported by motorized infantry, self-propelled artillery engineers, and reconnaissance units, all moving at the same speed, all communicating by radio. The German military establishment was skeptical. Traditional cavalry officers argued that tanks should support infantry, not operate independently. Infantry officers argued that tanks were too vulnerable to anti-tank guns. Artillery officers argued that tanks could not provide the sustained firepower that artillery provided. The proposals were expensive, unproven, and contrary to doctrine developed over centuries. Guderian's response was to demonstrate the concept. In 1935, he commanded a mechanized unit during military exercises. His unit moved faster, covered more ground, achieved objectives more quickly than conventional units. The exercises were not combat, but they showed the potential. More importantly, Guderian had an audience. Adolf Hitler attended the 1935 exercises and was impressed by the speed and power of the mechanized formations. Hitler, who had served as a corporal in World War I and had personal experience with the stalemate of trench warfare, immediately understood the potential of mechanized warfare to avoid the grinding attrition that had characterized the previous war. Hitler's support was decisive. In 1935, Germany began forming Panzer divisions. The first 3 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Panzer divisions were activated in October 1935. Guderian was promoted to General Major and given command of 2nd Panzer Division. Command of a Panzer Division gave Guderian the opportunity to implement his theories at operational scale. He organized the division around the principle of combined arms. Tanks provided breakthrough power and mobility. Motorized infantry consolidated gains and protected flanks. Artillery provided fire support, engineers cleared obstacles, reconnaissance elements identified enemy positions and routes of advance. Critically, every element was motorized and equipped with radios. The entire division could move at tank speed, approximately 25 miles per hour on roads. Communication between all elements was continuous. Guderian could issue orders from his command vehicle, and those orders reached battalion commanders in minutes. He trained his officers to exercise initiative within the framework of his operational intent. Lower commanders did not wait for specific orders. They understood the objective, understood the concept of operation, and made tactical decisions to achieve the objective. This decentralized execution, combined with centralized intent, would become the hallmark of German military effectiveness. In 1938, Guderian published Achtung Panzer, Attention Tanks, a book, summarizing his mechanized warfare concepts. The book argued that future wars would be decided by speed and shock rather than attrition and firepower. Tanks concentrated at decisive points could rupture defensive lines. Motorized forces could exploit breaches before defenders reacted. Air power could substitute for artillery, providing fire support that could move as fast as tanks. The book was controversial. Conservative German officers criticized it as overestimating tank capabilities and underestimating traditional arms. But the book was read widely, including by foreign military officers. British and French intelligence agencies obtained copies, translated sections, and assessed the concepts. Their conclusion was that Guderian overestimated mechanization. Tanks could not achieve the speeds he claimed. Radio communication was unreliable. The concepts were theoretically interesting, but operationally impractical. This assessment was catastrophically wrong. Guderian's concepts were not theoretical. They were being implemented in German Panzer divisions that were training continuously, refining tactics, developing procedures that would work in combat. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, Guderian commanded the Panzer Corps consisting of 3rd Panzer Division and 2nd and 20th Motorized Divisions. His corps attacked across the Polish corridor, advancing 140 miles in 5 days, reaching the outskirts of Warsaw by September 6. The Polish army attempted to defend using World War I tactics, static defensive lines, infantry, and trenches artillery providing fire support. These tactics were adequate against infantry attacks but useless against mechanized forces moving at 30 miles per hour. By the time Polish commanders identified where German forces were attacking, the Germans had already broken through and were advancing to new objectives. Polish cavalry units attempted to stop German tanks. The cavalry charges were brave but futile. Horses could not catch tanks. Lances and sabers could not penetrate armor. The charges were massacred by machine gun fire from German armored vehicles. The Polish campaign demonstrated everything Guderian had theorized. Mechanized forces could advance faster than defenders could react. Radio communication allowed coordination across dispersed formations. Combined arms tactics, tanks, infantry, artillery, air support were more effective than any single arm. The campaign ended in 5 weeks with complete German victory. But Poland was a limited test. The Polish army was not well equipped, not well trained, and was strategically trapped between Germany and the Soviet Union. The real test would be France. France, in 1940, had a larger army than Germany, more tanks than Germany, better tanks than Germany. The French char, B-1 BIS, was superior to any German tank in armor and firepower. French defensive positions along the Maginot Line were the most sophisticated fortifications ever constructed. French military doctrine was developed by officers who had commanded corps and armies in World War I who had decades of experience. French doctrine emphasized methodical operations, careful planning, strong defenses, and overwhelming firepower. When Germany attacked, France would defend along prepared positions, absorb the initial assault counterattack when German forces were exhausted, and grind Germany into defeat through superior resources. The doctrine assumed that warfare in 1940 would resemble warfare in 1918. This assumption was wrong. Guderian had created a different kind of warfare. The German plan for invading France was based on Guderian's concepts. Fall Gelb Case Yellow called for 3 army groups. Army Group B would attack through Belgium and Holland, drawing French and British forces north. Army Group A, containing 7 Panzer divisions, including Guderian's 99th Panzer Corps, would attack through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, and drive west to the English Channel, cutting off Allied forces in Belgium. Army Group C would conduct holding operations along the Maginot Line, preventing French forces there from redeploying. The entire plan depended on Army Group A achieving breakthrough at the Meuse and exploiting faster than French forces could respond. The plan was considered risky by German high command. If the Ardennes attack stalled, if the Meuse crossings failed, if French forces counterattacked successfully, the entire operation would collapse. Many senior German officers preferred a conventional attack through Belgium, repeating the World War I strategy with mechanized improvements. Guderian argued that the conventional approach would fail. Belgium and Holland were where the Allies expected attack. They had deployed their best forces there. A conventional attack would become a grinding battle of attrition that Germany could not win. The only path to victory was through surprise and speed attack, where not expected move faster than the enemy could react exploit before defenses could be organized. His argument prevailed. Fall-Gelb was approved with the Ardennes attack as the main effort. Guderian's 99th Panzer Corps would lead the assault. The advance through the Ardennes, as described at the beginning of this narrative, was the first phase. The second phase was crossing the Meuse River at Sedan. French forces held defensive positions on the west bank. The positions were not heavily fortified. The French considered the Ardennes impassable and had positioned their best forces further north, but they were adequate to stop conventional river crossings. Guderian's plan was unconventional. Instead of waiting for infantry to clear the west bank, he would use Luftwaffe dive bombers to suppress French positions, cross with tanks, immediately establish a bridgehead, and bring infantry across once the tanks had secured the far bank. The plan violated infantry doctrine, which stated that river crossings required infantry to cross first, clear defensive positions, then bring tanks across on bridges once the far bank was secure. On May 13, 1940, at 1600 hours, the assault began. Luftwaffe Stukas dive-bombed French positions for 3 hours, flying continuous sorties, creating enough chaos that French defenders could not maintain coordinated fire. At 1900 hours, German engineers began constructing pontoon bridges while under fire. By 2200 hours, the first tanks crossed. French counterattacks attempted to destroy the bridgehead. French tanks and infantry attacked at night, hoping to push German forces back into the river. The attacks were uncoordinated, launched piecemeal, defeated by German forces that had established defensive positions and were in radio communication with supporting units. By dawn on May 14, the 99th Panzer Corps had 3 divisions across. The Meuse had expanded the bridgehead to 15 miles wide and 10 miles deep and was preparing to break out westward. The French defensive line had been ruptured. The strategic question was what would happen next. Guderian's answer was to drive west, immediately exploiting the breakthrough before French forces could establish new defensive lines. This was the critical moment. German High Command wanted to consolidate the bridgehead, bring up infantry, secure the flanks, then advance methodically. This was standard doctrine. Breakthrough, consolidate, prepare for the next phase. Guderian argued the opposite. Consolidation gave defenders time to react. The breakthrough had to be exploited immediately while defenders were disorganized. Speed was everything. Drive west as fast as possible, ignore threats to flanks, accept risk of being cut off, trust that speed would prevent defenders from organizing effective counterattacks. This argument became increasingly heated as 99th Panzer Corps advanced. On May 15th, Guderian's forces advanced 40 miles, reaching Montcornet. On May 16th, they advanced 50 miles, reaching Marle. On May 17th, they advanced 45 miles, reaching Saint-Quentin. The Corps was now 100 miles beyond the Meuse bridgehead, operating in open country, with French forces scattered on both flanks. German High Command panicked. The Corps was exposed, vulnerable, advancing into a potential trap. Orders were issued to halt, consolidate, wait for infantry to catch up. Guderian protested the orders through his immediate superior, General Oberst Uwald von Kleist, commanding Panzer Group Kleist. The exchange between Guderian and von Kleist on May 17th nearly ended Guderian's career. Von Kleist ordered the advance halted. Guderian argued the order would lose the campaign. Von Kleist insisted. Guderian offered his resignation. Von Kleist accepted it. Only intervention by higher headquarters prevented the resignation from taking effect. General Oberst Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding Army Group A, recognized that Guderian was correct and von Kleist was wrong. Von Rundstedt approved a compromise. Guderian could conduct reconnaissance in force, meaning he could continue advancing but not call it an advance. The semantic distinction was meaningless. Guderian's entire corps conducted reconnaissance westward at maximum speed, covering 35 miles on May 18th, 40 miles on May 19th, reaching Abbeville on the English Channel on May 20th. The advance from the Meuse to the Channel, 100 miles through the heart of France, had taken 7 days. Allied forces in Belgium were cut off. French and British units that had advanced into Belgium to meet the expected German attack were now trapped between German forces to their south and west and German forces advancing from the east. The strategic situation was irreversible. Allied forces in Belgium either surrendered or withdrew to Dunkirk for evacuation. The campaign in France continued through June, but the strategic outcome was determined by May 20th. The French army never recovered from the shock of the breakthrough. French command structure collapsed. Orders were issued and ignored. Counterattacks were planned, but never executed. Units retreated without coordination. On June 22nd, France signed an armistice. The entire campaign lasted 6 weeks. German casualties were 27,074 killed, 111,034 wounded. French casualties were 92 and killed, 250,000 wounded. British casualties were 68,000 killed, wounded, or captured. The casualty ratio and campaign duration demonstrated that this was not World War I-style attrition. This was a different kind of warfare, where speed and shock achieved results that firepower and attrition could not. Guderian was promoted to Generaloberst and received command of Panzer Group Guderian for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, in June 1941. The campaign demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of Blitzkrieg doctrine. Initially, Blitzkrieg worked perfectly. Panzer Group Guderian advanced 400 miles in 3 weeks, reaching Smolensk by July 16th. Soviet forces were encircled in massive pockets, hundreds of thousands of prisoners, captured, vast quantities of equipment destroyed. The campaign appeared to be succeeding even faster than France. But the Soviet Union was not France. The distances were enormous, far beyond anything Blitzkrieg doctrine had contemplated. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles. Logistics broke down. Fuel shortages stopped advances more effectively than Soviet resistance. The mechanized forces that had moved so quickly in France were immobilized in Russia by lack of gasoline. Worse, Soviet forces absorbed catastrophic losses and continued fighting. Divisions that were destroyed were replaced by new divisions formed from reserves. Territory that was occupied continued producing partisan resistance. The assumption that rapid operational victory would lead to strategic collapse proved false when the opponent had sufficient depth and resources to survive initial defeats. Guderian recognized these problems but could not solve them. Blitzkrieg doctrine was designed for rapid campaigns in limited theaters. It was not designed for continental-scale wars of attrition. When the campaign in Russia became attritional warfare, Blitzkrieg lost relevance. Guderian's relationship with Hitler deteriorated. They disagreed on strategy, on objectives, on conduct of operations. In December 1941, during the Soviet winter counteroffensive outside Moscow, Guderian ordered his forces to withdraw to defensible positions. Hitler ordered them to hold in place. Guderian disobeyed the order, believing withdrawal was necessary to save his forces. Hitler relieved him of command. Guderian spent 1942 and early 1943 in forced retirement. He was recalled in February 1943 and appointed Inspector General of Panzer Troops, a staff position responsible for training, equipment, and organization. He no longer commanded forces in the field but influenced how panzer forces throughout the German military were organized and employed. In this role, Guderian attempted to implement reforms that might extend the war. He advocated for mass production of proven tank designs like the Panzer IV and Stu G3, rather than expensive complex designs like the Tiger and Panther. He argued for defensive operations that would conserve forces rather than offensive operations that consumed them. He proposed creating mobile reserves that could counterattack Allied breakthroughs rather than static defenses that would be overrun. Most of his proposals were rejected or ignored. German industry was already committed to complex designs. Hitler insisted on offensive operations despite lack of resources. The military situation was deteriorating too rapidly for reforms to matter. After the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt on Hitler, Guderian was appointed Chief of the General Staff, the highest professional military position in the German army. But the position had become meaningless. Hitler made all strategic decisions personally, often overruling military advice. The General Staff existed to implement Hitler's decisions, not to provide independent counsel. Guderian held the position through March 1945, presiding over the final collapse. He argued repeatedly for realistic assessment of the military situation, for withdrawal to defensible lines, for negotiated peace. Every argument was rejected. On March 28, 1945, Hitler relieved Guderian of his position, citing health reasons. Guderian spent the final weeks of the war in forced retirement. He surrendered to American forces on May 10, 1945. He was interrogated extensively by Allied intelligence officers who were interested in his operational concepts and his role in developing Blitzkrieg doctrine. He was held in various POW camps until June 1948, when he was released without trial. Unlike many senior German officers, Guderian was not prosecuted for war crimes. His role had been primarily operational and tactical rather than political or administrative. After his release, Guderian wrote his memoirs, published in 1951 as Erinnerungen eines Soldaten, Memoirs of a Soldier, translated into English as Panzer Leader. The book provided his perspective on the campaigns he led, his disagreements with Hitler, and his views on why Germany lost the war. The book was controversial. Critics noted that Guderian minimized his complicity in Nazi crimes, presented himself as a professional soldier rather than a Nazi collaborator, and blamed Germany's defeat on Hitler's strategic incompetence rather than the fundamental immorality of the regime. These criticisms were valid. Guderian served the Nazi regime, willingly implemented operations that facilitated genocide and benefited from the regime's expansion. But the book also contained detailed analysis of operational concepts that influenced post-war military thinking. Guderian's explanations of mechanized warfare, combined arms operations, and decentralized command were studied by military officers worldwide. The concepts he developed in the 1930s and implemented in 1940 became foundational to modern armored warfare. Guderian died on May 14, 1954, at age 65 in Schwangau bei Füssen, Bavaria. He was buried in the Friedhof Hildesheimer Strasse Cemetery in Goslar, Lower Saxony. His grave is marked by a simple headstone with his name and dates. His legacy is complex and contradictory. He was a brilliant operational commander who developed concepts that changed warfare fundamentally. He was also a willing servant of a criminal regime whose operations enabled conquest and genocide. Both aspects are historical reality. Neither can be separated from the other. The operational concepts he developed, mechanization, radio communication, combined arms, decentralized execution, were adopted by every major military after World War II. The U.S. Army's airland battle doctrine of the 1980s was based explicitly on German Blitzkrieg concepts. Soviet deep operations doctrine incorporated mechanization and speed. Israeli armored tactics in 1967 and 1973 reflected Guderian's emphasis on breakthrough and exploitation. The modern main battle tank exists because of concepts Guderian developed. The integration of armor, infantry, artillery, and air power into combined arms teams was pioneered by Guderian. The use of radio communication to enable decentralized command while maintaining coordination was implemented first by Guderian. Modern military GPS satellite communication and digital command systems are technological successors to the radio networks Guderian installed in Panzer divisions. But Guderian's most important contribution was not technological or tactical. It was conceptual. He understood that speed in decision-making was more important than firepower. He understood that exploiting success was more important than consolidating gains. He understood that accepting risk in pursuit of operational objectives was necessary for decisive results. These concepts challenged military orthodoxy in the 1930s. They remain challenging today. Military institutions prefer certainty, prefer caution, prefer consolidation. Guderian argued that speed, risk, and exploitation were necessary for victory. The campaigns of 1939–40 proved that he was correct, at least in the specific contexts of Poland and France. Whether his concepts apply universally is debatable. Blitzkrieg failed in the Soviet Union when distance and Soviet resilience negated speed advantages. Blitzkrieg was irrelevant in the Pacific, where terrain and logistics dominated operations. Modern precision weapons and surveillance technology have changed the tactical environment in ways Guderian never contemplated. But the core insight remains valid in warfare. Speed of decision-making and execution creates advantages that firepower and resources cannot match. An inferior force that acts faster than a superior force can achieve results before the superior force reacts. This was true in 1940. It remains true today. Heinz Guderian, born June 17, 1888, died May 14, 1954. General Oberst Inspector General of Panzer Troops, Chief of the General Staff. The officer who developed Blitzkrieg doctrine, who commanded panzer forces in Poland, France, and Russia, who changed warfare through concepts that remain relevant 80 years after their implementation. 3. Panzer divisions through the Ardennes. 7 days from the Meuse to the Channel. 6 weeks to defeat France. The architect of lightning war who proved that speed could triumph over mass, that mobility could defeat firepower, that modern technology combined with innovative tactics could achieve results that conventional forces considered impossible. The man who changed warfare forever by understanding that decision cycles, not battles, determine campaigns. That initiative, not strength, creates advantage. That speed, properly employed, is the decisive factor in military operations. The general who commanded from the front, who saw the battlefield directly, who issued orders by radio that reached subordinates in minutes rather than hours. The theorist who wrote doctrine that armies worldwide studied and adapted. The architect whose concepts shaped modern mechanized warfare and remain foundational to military operations in the 21st century.